Imagine this. The guy who owns 4 flashy nightclubs in 2 cities struts around like he owns the world. He's always bragging about his new cars, new watches, and cash pouring in every weekend. But behind the scenes, he's stiffing the one person he should never cross, his accountant. Well, that accountant just so happens to be my best friend. And let me tell you, Scott had no idea that cheating him would lead to losing everything. If you've ever wanted to see karma slam someone so hard that the IRS gets involved, hit that like button and subscribe. This is one of the most satisfying revenge stories you'll hear today. And it all starts with a guy who thought he was untouchable. My best friend, we'll call him Jake, is an accountant. Not the boring, push pencils all day kind. Jake runs his own firm and handles finances for small to medium businesses. He's meticulous, sharp, and most importantly, he knows how to find money where people think it's invisible. Now, one of Jake's clients was this guy we'll call Scott. Scott was the kind of person you notice the second he walks into a room. Flashy watches, cologne so strong it could knock you over, and this smug grin like he was smarter than everyone around him. Scott owned 4 bars and clubs across 2 cities. His places were known for packed dance floors, loud music, and cash flying across the counters on weekends. But despite all that flash, Scott had a habit that drove Jake insane. He was always late on payments. Not a day or 2 late, weeks, months, and every time he had an excuse. Business is slow, he'd claim. Money's tight this month, he'd text. But I knew Scott was full of it. I actually played in a Thursday night poker game at one of his bars, and every single Thursday, the place was packed. People shoulder to shoulder at the bar, poker tables full, and drinks flowing non-stop.
One night, I'm at Jake's house, sharing a couple beers, and he's fuming. His legs bouncing, his face is tight. He finally admits, "I've got a client that owes me a ton of money. I'm about ready to lose it." When he finally says the name, I almost choke on my beer. Scott? He's claiming business is slow? Dude, that bar is wall to wall every Thursday. Jake squints at me. "You're kidding. He says he's barely scraping by." I tell him about the cash discount deal Scott had started. 15% off if you pay cash. Jake's eyes widen slowly, like a detective putting the last piece of a puzzle in place. "Cash discount, huh?" he mutters. That night, he didn't say much else, but I could see the gears turning. 2 weeks later, Jake calls me. "You playing poker tonight?" "Yeah. Mind if I come?" He comes, watches the chaos of Scott's bar firsthand, people waving cash, servers barely keeping up, and his eyes are practically glowing. On the drive home, he drops the bomb. I think Scott is hiding income, a lot of income. See, Jake has full access to Scott's books. He knows how much liquor he's buying, what payroll looks like, rent, utilities, all of it. And when he compared it to the tiny revenue numbers Scott reported, it didn't add up, not even close. "He's selling way more than he's claiming," Jake said. "I bet he's hiding 35, maybe 40% of his revenue in cash alone." Jake spent the next few weeks going full forensic accountant mode. He visited all 4 clubs, noted drink prices, even counted how many bottles were emptied on busy nights. He cross-referenced all that with the invoices for alcohol, payroll, and utilities. And the math was brutal. Over the last year alone, Scott had underreported 35 to 40% of his income. Digging deeper, Jake realized Scott had been lowballing his revenue for years, probably 20 to 25% under the table all along.
At this point, Scott owed Jake thousands of dollars. Jake joked it was enough to buy a brand new motorcycle, but instead of begging for payment, Jake decided he wanted real payback, and he knew exactly where to get it. The IRS whistleblower program. If you're not familiar, if someone's cheating on their taxes and you provide proof, the IRS will reward you with 15 to 30% of whatever they recover. And Scott's underreported revenue? millions. With a lawyer's help, Jake compiled everything. Purchase records, revenue reports, payroll inconsistencies, even notes from nights at the bars. And then, he fired Scott as a client and filed the whistleblower report. The waiting game was brutal. It wasn't fast. There were months of silence, legal back and forth, and auditing. And then one day, it happened. The IRS came down on Scott like a wrecking ball. It was estimated he had underreported $4.5 million in revenue. His flashy empire? Gone. The clubs? No longer his. Scott went from being the king of the nightlife to a ghost. Jake never told me the exact payout, but he just smiled and said, "Let's just say I don't have a mortgage anymore, and it would have been a lot cheaper for Scott to just pay me." Scott thought he was untouchable. He thought stiffing Jake was just another hustle in a life full of shortcuts. But in the end, his own arrogance destroyed him. He lost his businesses, his reputation, and millions to the IRS, all because he couldn't be bothered to pay the guy keeping his books clean. And Jake? He got his revenge, legally and profitably. Sometimes, karma doesn't just knock on your door, it sends the IRS with a battering ram. If Scott had simply paid what he owed, he'd still have his clubs today. Instead, he paid for his greed the hard way. If that story gave you goosebumps, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen? And of course, subscribe for more stories, where karma comes back in style.